he is always aware of Cain in themselves. And when he or she serves God, he or she does so from an awareness of Cain in themselves, from that place from which they already killed people. I say killed because our shootouts are verbal, but the same Cain is behind those verbal shootouts. Welcome back to my channel. We're going through the Sermon on the Mount, and the next text says, "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny." Here, Jesus gives two examples of the practical application of the commandment, "You shall not murder," as interpreted by the peacemaker from the perspective of integrated justice and mercy. Jesus presents two situations in which a transformed person is seen practically building peace. In the first situation, peace is to be made with a brother in the context of a religious system of control. The text says, "If you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift." At first glance, it does not seem as though anyone's life is in danger here, but rather that Jesus is commenting on temple worship, saying that a too sensitive a conscience is the path to peace, and that it is right to interrupt the worship service if the peacemaker remembers that someone is angry with them. However, things are much more serious here. Jesus here continues to allude to the narrative of Cain and Abel for three reasons. First, worshippers in the temple did not bring an offering to the altar because only the priests had the access to the altar, whereas Cain and Abel brought their offerings directly to the altar without an intermediary. Second, there is no connection between the commandment, "You shall not murder," the unresolved interpersonal relationships, and the offering of the sacrifice on the temple altar, while that connection most certainly exists in the narrative of Cain and Abel. And third, this entire section speaks about anger, murder, brothers, and the offering of a sacrifice on the altar, which all of this alludes to Cain and Abel. But pay attention to whom Jesus is drawing attention here as an example of a peacemaker who fulfills the commandment, "You shall not murder," in a real life situation. Not to Abel, but to Cain. This makes sense for two reasons. Firstly, if Jesus' criterion for murder is an anger that matures into verbal contempt and condemnation, many people are responsible for verbal murder. This means that humans are much closer to Cain than to Abel. That is why Jesus calls on people to put themselves in the position of Cain and not Abel. And secondly, because of the human inclination toward the revenge. For the murder of his brother, God condemned Cain to be a fugitive and wanderer, separated from people. When Cain feared that someone would kill him as soon as they meet him, God promised that they would not. The text says, "Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." From then on, revenge has always been the way in which self-willed people understood and administered justice. Here is what Cain's descendant Lamech said. He said, "If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold." Revenge is the natural way in which people deal with violence, injustice, and survive in this world. So Cain is a marker of that place in human nature which is prone to struggle for survival and revenge. Jesus, in this part of the sermon, says that a person that went through a paradigm shift does not use ritual and religion to cover up murderer within them. They have integrated Cain within themselves and do not allow him to hide behind religion. Paul was such a person. He says, "This is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief." Before this, Paul was convinced that he was right, and for that reason he persecuted the church, having judged his future brothers as heretics. A self-willed person avoids confronting the Cain in himself. They think they're righteous in doing revenge. However, a converted person does not. He is always aware of Cain in themselves, and when he or she serves God, he or she does so from an awareness of Cain in themselves, from that place from which they already killed people. I say killed because our shootouts are verbal, but the same Cain is behind those verbal shootouts. Therefore, anyone who has integrated Cain within themselves, before they approach to worship, they first go to be reconciled with their brothers or sisters in order to remain aware of the killer within them and maintain their paradigm shift. The religious system teaches the opposite. Ritual or dogma comes first, but in reality, this only serves to cover up and postpone the concrete problem with a brother or sister, letting anger turn into hatred and escalate, giving time to anger. Jesus has equated the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God, with the commandment that says, love your neighbor as yourself. In doing so, he stated that love for one's fellow man is an inseparable part of a true worship, and warns that no amount of sacrifice or religious posturing can replace reconciliation and love between people. Therefore, a peacemaker serves God from his Cain place within himself by actively building peace with those with whom he is on bad terms. Because building peace with those we are at odds is the remedy for revenge. In this way, we overcome the struggle for survival and rise above the legal minimum that only requires of us to not commit any evil. Furthermore, Jesus here nullifies the curse of Cain. Cains are called to stop running away from people and God, to not fear retribution, but to return to the community they have harmed. God did not create man to live alone, but to connect with God in love, and then to overflow that love to other people, creating a community of love that functions as one social organism. If in the midst of our expressing of love and gratitude to God, we become aware that our relationship with people are broken, Jesus calls us to stop the worship, put reconciliation with our neighbor before prayer or thanksgiving to God, and to come before God together as a social organism, not as loners, isolated in their pious self-deception. This is the righteousness of the peacemakers. The text says, "For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." Communal love, not a solo ritual. People that went through a paradigm shift are serious about practicing this. And that is why they're a light to the world. Because of integrated justice and mercy within them, peacemakers see through the religious facade and are routinely prepared to break off a sacred ritual to seek reconciliation with a neighbor. It is not even important whether everything ends with a happy ending, with reconciliation. The goal is to prevent the Cain-like mindset from prevailing in us and spiraling into revenge, contempt, and judgment. Like the Apostle Paul, they live humbly before God, before themselves and before other people, not denying the Cain in themselves, but building peace from that fratricide within themselves. The alternative is the self-deception, that there is no Cain in us, that we are fine, that there is no need to engage the killer within, and to continue the process of paradigm shift because we have not killed anyone. This alternative will amount to a life of false piety that revolves not around love for one's neighbor, but around love for correct rituals, orthodox dogmatics, and expensive gifts with which we think we can buy out or compel God to save us and to ignore our poor relationships with his children. This was precisely the focus of Cain before he killed his brother, and of Pharisees before they engineered the crucifixion of Jesus. God knows exactly what he is looking for when it comes to people, and it is not their sacrifices, theories, and rituals. In the second example, in the second situation from our text, peace must be made with the accuser in the context of the political system. The text says, "Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny." So here we have a more serious situation than the first. Firstly, we no longer have a brother who has a grievance against us, but an adversary. Secondly, because of our negligence or hesitation to settle the matter, it becomes increasingly certain that the problem will escalate and lead to a lawsuit before the secular courts. A literal translation of Jesus' word agree would be voluntarily agree with your adversary, or in good faith surrender yourself completely to your accuser. From this text, it follows that a person who went through a paradigm shift has two characteristics. First is initiative. They are the first to approach the accuser with a sincere desire to make amends and build peace. And second, promptness. A sense of urgency is shown in reaching an agreement. How is this the opposite of murder? Because through an extrajudicial settlement based on humanness, repentance, and love for one's neighbor, the peacemaker remains above legal minimum, in a zone of love over which the law has no jurisdiction. Paul said, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law." To mend a relationship requires almost all that Paul listed here. But when a transformed person applies all this to repair a broken relationship and make amends, they remain above the legal minimum and beyond the reach of the law and courts, both divine and human. They have integrated justice and mercy. For the sake of justice, they will never deny when someone rightfully accuses them and seeks compensation. But for the sake of mercy, they will reach an extrajudicial settlement on a personal level with their adversary. In this way, peacemakers allow God's light to enter this world and show not only that it is possible to reach an agreement on a personal level without the intervention of or coercion of the system, but that it is possible to live well and in peace with all people, including enemies. Solomon said, "When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him." The alternative is sadly well known: stubbornness, a refusal to honestly assess the situation, to take responsibility and make amends, and the pursuit of justice through courts. All this is a Cain-like struggle for survival that always results in murder, even if only verbal. They sink below the legal minimum and fall under the punitive reach of a system that will not let them go until it has completely drained them out. Jesus said, "Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny." This is a completely realistic picture of what happens in courts today, between neighbors who sue each other over all sorts of things, all of which stems from poor interpersonal relationships that courts are not even interested in. All that is needed to build peace is just a little humility, honesty, and goodwill. Reflection on the injustice done and the desire for retribution are great temptations that lead to bitterness, demonization of one's opponents, and an endless spiral of revenge that will further complicate the situation until it finally suffocates the light in people. Peacemakers are people who do not let their light be extinguished. They break this spiral in the bud as soon as they learn that someone has a grievance against them, whatever the cost, because light is priceless. This does not mean that they will admit a non-existent guilt and agree to all terms demanded by the accusers, because that would not be just. But out of grace, they will be genuinely interested in the accuser's situation, their well-being, and their greatest good. Their highest interest is in building peace and the community of love with others. They reconcile privately and on personal level, not publicly and through the courts, because there is no space for humanness and love there. If they do come to court, they do not bring hostility and bitterness into it, nor do they seek to defeat their opponents at all costs. They're prepared to sacrifice material things if it will mend relationships, because another person is of greater value than honor or property. A good relationship with another is more important than worship, than damages, and than their own interest. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, said Jesus, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny. A peacemaker is a person who needs all people. They build peace with everyone, live a life of forgiveness, love God and people, quickly smooth over relationships, even with their enemies, because they are aware that all people are just a step away from death, that they often make mistakes, and that they constantly need forgiveness and support until they find their narrow path. Not everyone can understand this, for a different mind is required. Apostle Paul said, "But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is rightly judged by no one. For who has known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ." God is the ultimate peacemaker who promised Cain that he would still protect him, even though he had killed his brother and alienated himself from God, from people, and from himself. God always takes the initiative. He has unlimited goodwill towards his enemies, promptly and swiftly makes reconciliations. He is just and merciful at the same time, reconciles extrajudicially regardless of the cost, and represents a world without a system of control, where free people of goodwill use their freedom to love, forgive, and build peace.